G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys NBA podcast. It's another duo pod with myself and Callum. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, dude, pretty good, man. We had our fantasy draft, so it's a exciting time of the year. All of our listeners out there, I'm sure, would be in a similar scenario as us. So, yeah, how you going?
Yeah, mate, very good. There's the fantasy drafts are happening. Like, there's only 2 weeks left until the NBA season starts, which is pretty mind blowing to think about. I feel like we've just slammed home in this stretch to get to the season starting. But everything's going by pretty quick. So, yeah, lots happening.
That's it, dude.
Um,
I've got that game penciled in, like Brooklyn Nets versus Golden State Warriors on opening night. So,
yeah, the grudge match, KD versus the Warriors. See how it goes. So, like you mentioned off the top, we had our fantasy draft on the weekend, just gone. To give the listeners a bit of an idea of what the draft is like, it was a 10-team, 9-category head-to-head league. And because of COVID this year, we decided to expand the rosters a little bit more. So we actually had a 16 team league. I'm sorry, 16 players per team, basically, with two IR spots, just to give ourselves enough buffer room for all the missed games that we're expecting from COVID. So the league went 160 players deep for 10 teams. So we're going to break down our teams in a second, but just your general thoughts on how you thought you went on the draft. Obviously, it's a stressful day and shit happens. So how do you think
yeah,
you pulled up?
yeah, that's it. I feel like I did okay in the end. It's one of those things that obviously we have a 2-minute shot clock in terms of when we can pick up players. So when there's 10 people, it means obviously you have a little bit less time when it does come back around to you. I was the 8th pick in my draft, which isn't the best spot to be. It's okay. I feel like generally, if you have that 8th pick, you're pretty much getting Jokic 9 times out of 10. But we
Yeah,
can get into my team later. But I feel like I did okay. It gets to a point where I kind of when I hit on my 3rd pick, I knew what I was punting. And then from that point, I could
yeah,
kind of move on and keep going. Because once I did that 3rd pick and it kind of moved away from me a bit, I could
yeah.
be pretty confident and knew a way forward, if that makes sense. So I was kind of trying to make it up on the spot, but the pathway was pretty fine for me. And I do feel like I've made a pretty reasonable team. So we'll see how we go. What about yourself?
Yeah, look, it was look, I got a bit fancy before the draft. We mentioned our last pod that we got to pick our spots and where we wanted to draft, and I actually had the fourth opportunity to select where I wanted. And I told everyone on the pod that I wanted to go at number 3, and look, I would still recommend that. But I wanted to have a bit of fun with our league, and I want to pick 10 this year. But what I had two main reasons. One reason is that I'm a Celtics fan, and I think this is going to be the year that Jason Tatum solidifies himself as a MVP caliber, sort of all NBA level talent, and in the fantasy circles, a potential top 10 player. So I was excited to get Jason Tatum on my fantasy team, and never had him on my fantasy team before. So was excited to get that happening. We'll talk about that in a second. And the second reason was I didn't love the second round prospects really, and I wanted to avoid basically all those picks. So I wanted at least the first opportunity to select from that second round because there wasn't many options that I liked. So I guess we're going to go into our regrettable decisions later on, but I guess my biggest regret is going with that pick 10. It's a tough spot to draft from. Obviously, you're waiting a long time between picks, but but given the position I was drafting from, I did all right. And my team, I got a few players that I like that hopefully can put together good seasons. So if you're following along on YouTube, we're probably just going to pop up our teams, or the draft basically on screen now, so you can follow along and check out all the picks from there. We'll discuss mostly our teams and then a few sort of highlighted picks from the draft. So I'll throw it back over to you, Cal. What was let's start with like just your favorite picks in the draft and where you felt like you got the most value.
Well, maybe I'll break down what my team is first.
Yeah. Okay.
So well, I had that 8th pick, and I ended up picking up Nikola Jokic. I feel like he's not the most popular pick as of late. So he's
Yeah.
projected at 7. He's genuinely falling to the 8. So you look at the average Yahoo selection, even though it's ranking 7, he's being selected at that 8 spot, more times than not. So I picked him up. At that point, I realized, because going into it, I didn't really know who I could get. I felt like it was going to be Jokic or Dane.
Yeah,
Maybe a
right.
Luka or a Cat could fall to me, but I wasn't too sure. I was actually even considering Jason Tatum as well. But I thought,
Really?
no, you know what? I'll just get whoever falls to me. I'll take him because I feel like the
Yeah.
top 8 are pretty solid. So I got Jokic, and then from that point onwards, I knew that I was either going to punt 3-pointers or points or blocks or a combination of those 3 things just from
Yeah.
getting Nikola Jokic. And it all
Yeah.
mattered depending on my second, third, and fourth pick. So and obviously moving forward, I stuck to it, and we can talk through my team a bit more, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
um,
let's dive into maybe like your first 2 picks a bit deeper. You got Paul George coming back to you in the second round. What would that be at pick? What was that? Pick 12, basically.
yeah.
So some would say that maybe a little high on Paul George, but personally, I like it. I think it matches up pretty good with Jokic. What were your thought process in getting Paul George there?
So it was, yeah, once again, whoever kind of fell to me. So the 2 picks before that was LeBron and Kawhi
Yeah.
went just at 11, 12, and I'm being picked up at the 13th spot for Paul George.
Yep.
And my understanding was like, you know what, I think he's gonna have a comeback season. Last season he was a bit injured anyway. He had the
Yeah.
shoulders, he wasn't 100% healthy. Because of all these back-to-backs, we know that Kawhi will rest games. So I think if he's 100% healthy, his fantasy stock should be a bit higher just because he will be that number 1 option for, say, 20% of the games or something. So when you take
Yeah.
that aspect in, he's elite in threes, he's elite in steals. I think his points should definitely go up this season. So he's always been kind of like that around the 12th, best player previously. I think with Kawhi out, it only means he should maintain that. Is kind of like what I
Yeah.
was thinking. And when I selected him, I knew, okay, well, I can't punt threes anymore. He's elite there. And then from that point onwards, I realized, like, I'm gonna have to punt obviously the points. Oh, sorry, not points either. It would be blocks was kind of like my
Yeah.
locked in solution.
Yeah.
So like with Paul George, I'm getting a lot of points and a lot of threes. So I'm going to scrap blocks. Let's move forward. Let's try and get some good picks moving on there afterwards.
Yeah.
But look, if that doesn't work, maybe I could have gone for a balanced team. So it all depends on what I picked up in my third pick as well.
Yeah.
And in terms of like, well, I had heaps of options. I could have taken Devin Booker, KD, Joel Embiid, Kyrie, Ben Simmons. Those are
Yeah.
all on the board for me. But I just kind of decided that I think Paul George, he's got a pretty good ceiling this season. He's healthy. He's ready to go.
Well, one thing I'll point out for Paul George, which I think is the biggest upside for him, is the fact that he played less than 30 minutes a game last year. You mentioned before that he was coming off an off season where he had, I think he had dual shoulder
Yeah,
surgery?
both his shoulders.
Yeah,
Yeah,
both shoulder surgery in the off season, so they eased him back into it. So I think he actually missed the start of the season as well.
he did. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was slow to ramp up, so his minutes at the start of the season don't reflect his output at the end of the season. And I know we all have a bit of a bad taste of the playoffs in our mouth and the letdown that was the Clippers, but throughout the season, especially towards the end, he was putting up some big numbers. And if his minutes were closer to that 34, 35 minute range, he could easily be first round sort of value, and was selected sort of towards that early in drafts last year before the shoulder surgery news sort of bumped him back down. But I think it's a great selection there. I think he's fine in that range. And obviously, you've avoided some players like Kevin Durant and Embiid, Kyrie Irving, who all have some injury risks and potential risks for resting back to backs. Were you purposely avoiding those players?
Yeah, I was. I know that Nikola Jokic as my core piece is being pretty sustainable, but I just don't really like taking the dice on people. I'd rather there's a
Yeah,
team that can play that I'm more confident in. Obviously, you never know what's going to happen, but
yeah,
I'm more confident in Paul George than a lot of those players that you mentioned.
yeah. Okay. Speaking of players that are at risk of resting back to backs, I'll go through my first 2 picks. So obviously, my goal was Jason Tatum in the beginning. Being the homer that I am, I
What
wanted
happened?
him. What happened? Yeah. Well, funny you should mention that. There's this guy in our draft called Sam, and he decided to take it upon himself. Look, it was no secret when I picked pick 10 that everyone knew what I was trying to do, but I thought that you guys would all realize that there's a clear top 9, and that the first 9 would go as they were. I would select Tatum at number 10 and then back it up with another pick. But unfortunately, I got snaked right before me, and our friend Sam took Jason Tatum out of my reach. But look, that's okay because, like I said, I had a clear top 9. I had Trey Young at number 9 there, so I collected him in at the 10th pick, and I was pretty happy with that. You know, someone who's elite in assists, threes, points, free throw percentage. So 4 huge categories that can give me a big boom. And I followed that up with Kawhi Leonard. Okay, so obviously Kawhi is a bit of a risk there, but on a per game average, I think he was like the 3rd or 4th ranked player last year. So we know he puts up points. And my reasoning was this: we have a 16-man roster this year, but our starting rosters are still 10, so no bigger than normal on the starting rosters. We just have deeper benches. So my reasoning is that I'm going to be able to have more players available on those higher volume days if Kawhi rests. So I'll have someone else that I can plug in to play. And secondly, with COVID, it's so hard to predict. You know, who's to say that a game he rests, he might also have coronavirus, or other players have coronavirus. I think a lot of players are going to be missing a lot of games. And when I compare him to like a KD or a LeBron, I think his risk of injury outside of the resting is lower, and his fantasy upside is higher. So that was my selection there. And I think the pairing of him and Trey works pretty nicely, leaving me with an obvious sort of punt blocks build from there, and potentially a punt field goal percentage if I didn't get a big in my 3rd round. So that was my reasoning there. Look, devastated that I didn't get my boy Tatum, but I think fantasy-wise, I think I came out on top with that Trey Young fall to me.
Yeah, look, fair enough. So your eyes were set on, obviously you made those 2 picks. You said a punt block or a punt field goal.
Look, I was once I made those 2 selections, I was pretty keen on punting the field goal category. I don't necessarily like to have great percentages. I like to either punt one of the percentages, because like we've said before, some weeks you might have a great shooting week and you win that percentage category anyway. So I was pretty keen on that. Depending on who came back to me, I was tossing up. We'll go to our 3rd and 4th round pick. One of our busts actually fell to me at John Collins, and I strongly considered taking him as one of those picks to bounce back in blocks, but in saying that, I think that his block numbers could regress this year. So I decided to just completely forgo the category altogether, and I picked up a Toronto duo in Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam. So that solidified me in a heavy punt of field goal percentage and blocks, and a little bit of a soft punt in rebounds as well. But I did get some rebounds later in the draft.
Yeah. And then just to be clear, so John Collins in our draft fell all the way to 32.
Yeah. So
was his pick.
So, yeah. So
and I'm not too mad about that either.
No, I think that's the right spot for him to go. Like, I think, I considered him at 30 and 31, but ended up passing, and I think he's fine at 32 there. There's still some value, and the risk is acceptable there. Not at 13. And Yahoo's changed that, by the way. They've moved him back on the rankings, so it's good to see that they listen to the podcast.
Yeah, they must be fans.
All right, well, let's go on to your favorite picks moving forward. Who do you think you got a good value in the draft?
So I think what really solidified my punt blocks team was just that 3rd pick. So on my 3rd pick, I got Vucevic. So I got the 2 bigs that can get some points, get assists as well, which may be a bit easier on where I'm building with my my point guards. And then obviously I've got 2 centers that don't block the ball at all. They can't really leave the ground.
Yeah.
So after I was like, you know what, sweet. After that, I got Jamal Murray, who I'm a big fan of. Sometimes he's going to be a sleeper this year. I'm not going to be surprised at all if he puts up 25, 5 and 5 with really good threes. I'm looking forward. I hope that happens. I reached out. He's my 33 is where I ended up selecting. So
it's a good spot to get him.
I've invested in him, but I really hope it does pay out. I think the ceiling's there. My next pick was another big in Domantas Sabonis. So I got Domantas at.
I think that was a good selection there.
Great, 48 is where I got Domantas, and such a good fit for my build. That's why I loved taking him at that spot.
So I noticed a bit of a theme of your team, and if you guys look at Callum's team there, all of his centers seem to be able to get a fair few assists and threes. So were you purposely targeting those type of centers?
No, it just kind of happened. I was like, these centers can't block the ball. I think it's just a coincidence that centers who can't block genuinely can pass. So they're not super athletic, but they're just good passes, fundamentals. You might have noticed in our league, Mitch, I've actually changed my team name to Big Men Can Pass. That's my team name. Let's go.
Yeah,
Big man
yeah.
can pass. They can do it.
They can pass, especially your big men. So I think, like, if we read these names out, Jokic, Vucevic, Sabonis, Al Horford, even Mason Plumlee down the end there, are all guys that can get multiple assists per game. So that may strengthen the lack of assists that you've got from your guards in Jamal Murray. And I expect Malcolm Brogdon to maybe dip in assists a bit this year with Oladipo back in. But yeah, I think that's a strength of your team moving forward there. If I point out one of your picks there, this was the panic pick. The shot clock came down. You may see a name, Tyler Hero, who was on our bust list, but he's on your team there, Cal. Can you tell us what happened there?
Look, he was ranked, I think it was in the 60s. He was ranked about 66 on Yahoo. So he was a clear bust at that pick. I don't advise anyone to pick him that high.
Yeah.
But the clock was winding down. What pick did I got him at about...
I think it's 93.
Yeah,
it looks like 93.
Pick.
Yeah.
93rd pick. So the clock was winding down to me. I actually wanted to select someone else. Yeah. And I said his name and people were like, oh, dude, that man, he's been selected already. So, that's on me.
Yep.
That's on me. I wasn't paying attention. And sometimes that happens. And there was like 10 seconds left. And I was like, whose order? Whose order? It happened to be Tyler Hero. And I just kind of put my hands up and I was like, you know what? I'm a Heat fan. I'll take it. Maybe it's fate. I'll take Tyler Hero on my team. Let's go.
well, there's a lesson for everyone out there: is be aware of the clock. Number one, know who's already been selected. Number two, and be aware of, like, have backup options in that circumstance. Look at that spot. What did we say? 93. Tyler Hero is not a huge bust there. He could easily be a top 100 player, so it's not horrible. And as you said, you're a Heat fan, so you'll have fun watching him. But
and he's not going to value in blocks either.
No, that's right. Yeah, he fits your build. Yeah, it's not like you picked up Mitchell Robinson.
Whatever.
So yeah, I just thought that was funny that we talked about him on our bus show, and yet he's on your team. So, okay, I'll go into my team now. Look, one of my favorite picks that I got was I'll highlight a couple. Well, actually, one player that I think will be risky, who I selected pretty high, and we spoke about this on our sleeper pod, and basically picking on the turn, having to reach a little bit. So obviously I've got 20 selections between my picks, basically. So at pick 51, I've selected Michael Porter Jr., who now with Yahoo's updated rankings has moved right up into, I think he's 57th now on Yahoo, used to be outside the top 90. So at the time it was a bit of a reach, but I really like the idea and what Michael Porter Jr. can do this season and the opportunity ahead of him. Do you think it was a bit high for me to take him at 51?
It could have been. I'm not going to knock it. I mean, look, it's a 6th round pick. I'm not going to knock it. It could have been 1 or 2 rounds early, but at the same point in time, sometimes if you really want a player, you just got to go and get him. Maybe a good example of that as well in the draft was Gordon Hayward. He was picked early in the 5th round, and that's just because there's so much high side there, even though his rank, just because his rank is obviously not where it should be. If you think he's going to do well, get your player who you want to get. So I'm not going to hate it.
Yeah, pick 42, Gordon Hayward was taken there, which, is probably I'd say about where he's going to be valued this season. So probably not getting as much value there, but if you're big on him, then it's not a bad pick by any means.
I'll say the players who came after Michael Porter Jr., if I'm reading this right, I think I am.
Yeah.
You got Ja Morant was the pick after, Malcolm Brogdon, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart. Did you consider any of those guys?
Yeah, so again, on the turn, I'm selecting back-to-back there. My other pick pair with Michael Porter Jr. was Lonzo Ball. And so I was looking for a guard, looking to solidify some more assists, more threes and steals. And so I definitely considered both Ja Morant and Marcus Smart at that pick. I probably discounted Ja Morant first because even though he's a high point scorer and he gets good assists, he's young and exciting, he doesn't get offer the threes and steals. And even his free throw percentage is a bit shaky as well compared to, say, someone like Marcus Smart. And Lonzo Ball, I know his free throw percentage sucks, but he literally shoots 1 a game, so it's inconsequential. And then again, it was Marcus Smart and Lonzo Ball. And the Celtic fan in me wanted me to select Marcus Smart, but I just feel like Lonzo Ball's upside's a bit higher with Drew Holiday gone. I wanted his rebounding. I didn't want to completely just shut out rebounds from my team, so I wanted some guards that could get me some rebounds. He'll hit more threes, get some more assists, and negligibly, but slightly more blocks as well. So Those were the two players that I did consider very strongly, and just in the end edged out with Lonzo Ball. So, which I'm grateful for because it led me to getting both of the Ball brothers, and now my team can be called the Ball Boys. So, perfect team name. I'm pretty happy with that.
I do like the team name. I'll admit that. I'll touch on, as you said, yeah, look, your first 5 picks aren't really bigs. It
No,
depends if you want to put Michael Porter Jr. in that category. So,
or Pascal Siakam.
um, yeah, like, he's not a center. He's
No,
not going to pump the balls. He's not getting you 10
no,
rebounds a game. So
no.
it wasn't until your 7th pick you picked up Wendell Carter, and then your 8th pick you picked up Jaren Jackson Jr. Well, what was your mind state there? Why did you not just decide, you know what, maybe I'll punt rebounds and just keep going with what I'm going?
Well, look, I in the past, our drafts and our leagues have been it's been a very heavy punt league, and every team in our league likes to punt. And sometimes we can even get teams that are punting 3 or 4 categories at once. So I want to be strong in more than just 5 categories in case I come up against those teams who are heavy punting and just going for 5 categories so that I can beat them in the categories that I'm not really focusing too heavily on. So rebounds for me was one of those categories, and I was able to get, they're not centers, but Kawhi Leonard gets 7 rebounds a game. Pascal Siakam will get 7 rebounds. Lonzo Ball, 7 rebounds a game. I'm expecting Porter to get over 8 rebounds a game. So whilst they're not centers, they're still decent rebounders for their position. And basically, also, no other centers really that I thought of value came to me. I was hoping Sabonis was going to come to me. I would have loved Vucevic to get onto my team as a punt blocks guy, but they didn't fall to me. And I saw in my research that there was value in bigs later in the draft. So I just wanted to shore up those categories that I wanted to be really strong in. Threes, points. Points is extremely important in the early rounds of the draft. We know that the best scorers are the guys that come off the draft board first. So I wanted to make sure that I had lots of high scoring players. So outside of Lonzo Ball, I'm expecting all these players to average close to sort of 18 points a game plus. So that was my focus there. But yeah, ended up getting lots of centers. And the other thing is, we only have one center position on our roster. So having someone who's center eligible isn't a huge priority for me.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, look, I feel like the one glaring thing that looks at me when I look at my team now is it's the points. The points aren't really there, and it's always tough when you have Nikola Jokic as your first pick to try and make up for it, because everyone else in that first round is putting up 25 plus.
Yeah,
all of them. James Harden's putting up like 34 points.
Yeah.
So it's pretty tough when he's you got a guy that's averaging about 20. So look, I got Paul George as my second pick to try and make up for it, but overall, my team, the points, it's not amazing. It's a soft kind of punt. It's not a full punt because I still got players that put up. I'm hoping Jamal can have a breakout season. Vucevic puts up 20. Domantas Sabonis, 18. I'm hoping Markelle Fultz has a bit of a year. And then in that late round, so in the 14th round, I actually ended up getting Harrison Barnes, who I just don't really like at all. But it's like I just kind of decided, I just need someone who can get me like 16 points a night. And in the 14th round, that can be hard to get.
Yeah, it's the two categories that it's really hard to get late. Probably points is by far number one. You just don't find, and if there's only a few players that you can get later on, and even in our draft, they seem to go a bit earlier because everyone was aware of that. Players like Colin Sexton, even like a Kobe White, Andrew Wiggins, those sort of players who are pretty empty elsewhere but put up lots of points. They seem to go earlier in this draft than you otherwise would expect, just based on the value of that category. And it's not a category that you see people punting a lot. Most people are trying to win that category. So, sometimes by punting the category, you can get a good advantage because you're not trying to get those players. You can get value elsewhere. But yeah, I think, I guess in your case, you're hoping Jamal Murray has a big year and steps up and gets to that 25 points a game. And other players, like, who knows, maybe Tyler Hero is your savior. Maybe he can get up to close to 20.
That's it. Look, maybe he could be starting point guard. Like, who really knows what's going to happen?
Yeah.
I'll say just like a hypothetical to someone else out there who does pick Nikola Jokic. I was really tempted to take Jimmy Butler at my second pick. And the reason I do that is because I actually got a lot of options. Also, I love Jimmy Butler. Obviously, I'm a Heat fan myself. So that would have been sick. But if I could have picked him up at that point, I could be a punt points because he only puts up 20 as well. and
Yeah.
then from that point it'd be a clear punt points, and then I have the option of punting threes or blocks, and I could kind
Yeah.
of, or I could do punt all three. But Jimmy's your second pick with Jokic. He's actually a good player to pair up with them just because there's three very, very clear punt strategies you can go down. You can go down 1, 2, or whatever. So actually, I almost did that. Looking back at it, I actually would have liked to go down that avenue and see what my team would have ended up like. But look, I'm still happy with where we are.
I think it's a strong, like Paul George is a strong selection. And just because you're punting points doesn't mean you go for the player who averages the least amount of points. You can have a high point scorer if you're punting points, and you probably will, because all the best scorers are going to go early in the draft. That doesn't mean you reach for someone like a Drummond or a Gobert or something like that just because they don't score as much. You can probably get them later. So it's a difficult one to punt, and sometimes can cause you to stuff up. So just be cautious of that. Just because you're punting points doesn't mean that you avoid players who score high, because they're often really good in other categories. So just
Well, one question I'll throw at you is,
yeah,
hypothetically, let's say Jason Tatum did fall to you at the 10.
did
Who would you have picked at the 11 spot, if that was the case?
assuming Trey was off the board.
Yeah, correct. Trey's taken, and then you would have take Tatum at 10. Who's your 11?
Well, I was always set between, I was going to get 2 out of the 3 of Trey Young, Kawhi Leonard, or Jason Tatum. So if it was Jason Tatum and Kawhi, I would have got those 2, and Trey would have gone at 9. I then just would have been really trying to get a lot of assists on the next 2 rounds. I would have been trying to get 2 guards at that position instead of Pascal Siakam, who I picked up instead of another guard. I maybe would have gone for someone like a Chris Paul. I was hoping that Shea was going to fall to me as well, but unfortunately, Sam again sniped me. I've got some high expectations on Shea this year, and would be very comfortable drafting him in the 20s pretty comfortably. So I was hoping he would fall to me, and then I'd get a pairing of him and Van Vliet, but not to be. So I think the way it worked out with Trey Young with those high volume assists, I think it's a win really on the fantasy side of things. Let's time to call out a few of our colleagues over in our draft. Any picks that you think were just outrageous, and anything that you think we should highlight, name and shame?
I think we should. The first one that comes to mind, I've just got it in front of me now. It would have to be probably Duncan Robinson. I think he was taken too high. He was picked 76.
Yeah,
that's too high for Duncan Robinson. I'm sorry, but he'll get you threes. Like, he could average 4 threes a game. And I guess the points do come along with that. It's probably going to average 15 points, but he's not going to give anything else really. I guess his field goal isn't too bad either, but it doesn't help you either. It's just a real average category for him. So I feel like that one's kind of screaming at me. Otherwise, anyone who picked up Kevin Love, unfortunate for you. I think I'm not really a big fan of Rui Hachimura. He was picked up. It was pretty late though. I don't think he's a good fantasy player. He only really gets you kind of points. Doesn't really get defensive stats a whole lot, and it's not very efficient either. So he's very much a Harrison Barnes kind of prodigy, in my opinion. So otherwise, you had some players like Rajul Holmes might have gotten a little bit high, but I'm not gonna hate on it. One person who got picked pretty high in terms of the ratings was DeMar DeRozan. He got picked
very early.
36.
What was that? So, 37?
Yeah. So that's a pretty high pick. But once again, like, he brings so much value for certain teams that I can see him still having value at that pick.
Yeah. If I look at that team, actually, one of my things I was going to name and shame was on our friend Vidad's team. One thing that I want to caution some listeners is trying not to stack too much of your team from one NBA team. And if I go through Vidad's team, he's got basically the entire Mavericks roster on his team, from Luka to Kristaps. He's even got Josh Richardson, Tim Hardaway Jr., and he actually picked up Maxi Kleber when he moved Porzingis to the wire, which I like. I like that move, by the way.
That's a good move.
But just so many and some big names as well on your roster. The reason I say that, and I don't normally care, and especially he got them at good value. I think all those picks, they're all fine. But this year with COVID, if one of those players gets coronavirus, chances are there's an increased likelihood that they all get coronavirus. So you might have, in Vidad's case, 6 players that are out of action because of, they're all on the same team. So I think that's a good point, and one that one of our league mates actually brought up that I didn't consider before. That just to be aware of. Don't necessarily completely ignore the value, but early on in drafts specifically, and in this situation when you're drafting 5 players from the same team, I think it's probably, if you can avoid it, a good thing to avoid that. So um, yeah, just thought that was pretty funny though.
Yeah, no, that's a
um,
good point though. It's worth definitely worth picking up.
yep.
Do you reckon there was any glaring picks that screams out at you as a reach or?
Um, the other one I had my eye on was yeah, that Rory Hachimura and the Marcus Gasol pick. I know it's round 13, but Marcus Gasol's not going to play enough minutes. Like he's just not. Like he's a bench warmer. His career is this. I wouldn't surprise me. This is his last year in his career.
Oh, he
There's
could
good.
start, but he's only going to play like 20 minutes. You know.
If that, there are good centers on this team. Like Anthony Davis is going to play some minutes as center. They've got Montrezl Harrell there. I really don't see him putting up meaningful minutes. So I think that's a bit of a waste of the pick. For example, I drafted someone like Marvin Bagley later in the draft, who's got a much higher upside. Even someone like a Jarrett Allen, or I know this person's next pick was Dante DiVincenzo. I would have much rather him over Marc Gasol. Look, I know it's late. It's a bit nitpicky, but I can see that team basically dropping Marc Gasol a week into the season.